Okay, so we're going to wait just a little bit because I think some of the folks who are over at the other link have are joining still. So let me actually pause the. Okay, so welcome again to this first of our online classes of the Sunday series, and we'll see how long we do this. For now, it's set up for the end of March, through the end of March, but hopefully we will be back in person at some point before too long. So let me go ahead and do a screen share. I'm going to share the prayers with everyone since we don't have the prayer books, and some of you may not have access to that at home. So I'm going to try to make this work for everyone. We're going to start with the prayers that we normally do, and you can keep your microphone off. You don't have to recite with me. You can recite at home with me, but I figured we'd at least do these prayers that we normally do before the class. So we'll begin with reciting this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. So then we'll go to the prayer that starts with homage to Buddha. Whoops, sorry. Wait, go back and start again. There we go. Okay, it's right down at the bottom there. I didn't click down far enough. Okay, let's recite these verses then too. Homage to the Supreme Buddha. Homage to the Dharma refuge. Homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Whoops, sorry. This thing is so tricky because it's at a page break in the file. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Whoops, it didn't click down, sorry. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Then let's go forward to the short mandala offering. So this one too, it's got a bit of a page break in it, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to. No, I'll have to do those 3 lines and then click down to do the last line. All right, so let's do the short mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge and bodhicitta before the tea. We'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gi pesonagi ola penchir sangye rupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar sho. Okay, so again, welcome everyone. Glad that you made it online here for today's class. Let's go ahead and start with a short meditation as we usually do at the center. So this will give us a chance to focus the mind a little bit, to also generate a good motivation for being here and participating in this class. So again, just find a good meditation posture as usual and begin to attend to the breath. And if you have a technique you already use, then by all means, you're welcome to do that. If you need a suggestion, I generally suggest working with the point at the tip of the nose, where you feel the air coming in and out of the nostrils. Making that your meditation object, just try to stay present with it as best as you can through the inhalation, through the exhalation. But in any of your meditations on the breath, it's important to have that factor of vigilance, introspection, kind of checking in to see what the quality of our meditation is. And if we check in and we see that we've wandered, our mind has gotten distracted, that we're thinking about various things from the past or plans for the future or preoccupations, worries, what have you, um, so anyway, just when you see that that's happened, be sure to just note that, let that go, and make the conscious choice to return to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then after that, I will lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So I'll ring a chime to begin the meditation. So now let's set our motivation together for this session. And we can certainly look at the times that we live in and see how the evidence is there that samsara is imperfect, that no matter how much we try to fix the world around us, there will always be factors that arise that disturb our minds, that cause pain and suffering for ourselves and others, and so on. And it's especially important at these times when we do have that in our face evidence of the nature of samsara, that we funnel this into a deeper commitment to practice the path. Beginning with the understanding that we are under the control of these various factors, some of which we'll talk about a little bit today. Our own karma, our delusions, the states of mind that induce this pattern of creating the causes for samsara, for this conditioned existence. And every being is under the control of these same factors. As long as they are in samsara, they're really limited in terms of what dimensions of happiness they can actually experience. And inevitably, they do have to face the realities of sickness, aging, death, and so on, continuing to be reborn from life to life. So when we have these opportunities, as I said, it's important to use what we're experiencing as a way to open our hearts. First, to see with genuine compassion for ourselves how much we long to be free from this conditioned existence. How good it would be for ourselves to no longer be a part of this process, to continue to go from life to life, to continue to experience the varieties of suffering. But moreover, as we always emphasize in this tradition, when we look upon others and see that they are in the same predicament as ourselves, they have that fundamental desire to be happy, to not suffer. But because of these factors, because of being under the control of their karma and their delusions, they continue to create the causes for the opposite, never having a true end to their suffering and always being thwarted and obtaining true peace and happiness. So with a mind filled with compassion and love for all beings, especially at this time when our hearts can go out to all of those who are experiencing even greater fear, even greater harm than what we ourselves are experiencing, it's important that we generate that motivation of being here for the sake of all these beings, without exception. Every single one of them being the object of this mind that we set right now, this intention of bodhicitta, this sincere wish to be of the greatest benefit to all beings by developing our own qualities, especially as we're exploring in this course, to continue to push beyond our current limitations in terms of these 6 perfections, these 6 practices that will help us to become a Buddha, and then in that state be able to benefit all sentient beings so much more than we currently can. So hold that strong intention for being here today so that everything we do becomes a cause to eventually have that become reality for all beings to attain enlightenment through our own having attained that state. Okay, so welcome to today's class again. So I wanted to say a few comments before we get into the material for today, because I was talking to Gary and Nancy before the class started and been thinking about this idea before getting online today. We've been using this term social distancing, which of course is a way that they're talking about trying to avoid congregating in groups and having 6 feet between you and another person. But it's really just physical social distancing. I really want to emphasize that, especially at this time when we are doing these classes in this way, these become a very important part of our maintaining our social closeness, do some social nearing rather than distancing, if you can use that word. I don't know. But the idea is that I think it's also important that each of us tend to those people in our lives, maybe through using social media or the phone, calling people for a change rather than always texting or emailing or whatever. And certainly, please know that I'm available for people on an individual basis if you want to call me. I'm in the phone book. I'm not going to give my number over this, because this will get posted on YouTube and what have you. But I am in the phone book here in Santa Fe, so you can find it easily enough. And if you do find that you need to talk to somebody, whatever's going on for you, please feel free to give me a call. And I'm happy to do that for you. And I hope that we as a community can provide that support for each other. Most of you have some connections already to some other people in the community. Please take this opportunity to reach out regularly to try to create what connections you can, because especially those of us who might live alone, it's very important that we not have any more distancing, but rather feel some closeness, some connection in the midst of what's going on. I do feel that what's going on is a very important step in terms of working with this pandemic. It is very important that we all take this fairly seriously. We might be carriers ourselves, and it's important that we don't risk others' health and welfare. So I think it's very important that we abide by what's going on and do our best to avoid all those sorts of things that we would normally do. It's a minor interruption in our lives that will hopefully result in the greater well-being of so many more of our fellow Santa Feans, fellow New Mexicans, fellow Americans, fellow world beings. So, we can certainly, do this all with a very good intention, that we're doing our best, as we're talking about today with the perfection of ethics, we're doing our best to not harm others. And if we can benefit them, that's great. If you do have the ability to reach out to others, to help others, to buy groceries for them, pick up groceries for them, take people to a doctor's appointment, whatever it is that they might need, then by all means, I encourage you to do that. But it's really important that we at least not harm others by potentially causing this to be even worse than what it has already shown itself to be. Again, it looks like it's still in the beginning stages, so it's very hard to tell what will all happen. We'll see week by week. But that was kind of how I wanted to start today, at least, was really encouraging you to take advantage of what we're trying to offer here, which is an ability to stay connected with each other, to be able to receive the teachings that we normally do in our program. Keep in mind, we are streaming not just the Sunday and the Wednesday class, but also the Saturday morning class on establishing a daily practice that we just started yesterday. So we're going to try to possibly do some other events. I don't know, Mary and I will talk about that, but I think it is important that we take advantage of what means of connecting with others that we have, especially once more for those who are living alone. So again, please reach out if you need any assistance or help. So in this class, as I mentioned in the introduction, we are working with the 6 perfections, these practices of a bodhisattva. These are called perfections because they result in the state of perfect Buddhahood. They are practices that are not perfect yet, but we work on perfecting them. As this title says, we keep going beyond our limitations, to transcend the current limitations that we have. So let me go to the slides. I put together a few slides for this, and I may even put the prayers into the slides. I noticed, yeah, there were some comments about maybe the well, actually, there's one message I should say before I go too much further. Mary put it on the chat board, but just in case you didn't see it, please contact Mary as well if you need any help. Text or email. You can email, certainly her email is spc@tnlsf.org. Our website address at the back, SPC at the front for Spiritual Program Coordinator. So let's go ahead and do a little share. We'll figure out again how to work with the prayers going forward, but I could put them onto these PowerPoints as well and just share them from there. So the 6 perfections, as I've mentioned previously, we went through generosity over the last several weeks, and we started ethics this past week. Patience is the next one that we'll get to, which will probably take a fair amount of time. I don't know how far I'll get in even making it through the first several, much less all of them, before I leave at the end of April. If I do leave at the end of April, everything again is kind of up in the air. But the last 3, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom, recall that when we talked about these, we said the first 3 were primarily the practices for lay practitioners like ourselves, and the last 3 primarily for ordained. That doesn't mean that we don't practice all of them. It just means that these are the ones we should perhaps emphasize in terms of our own day-to-day life. The ability for us to practice generosity through the various means that we talked about, being generous with our material goods, being generous with our time and so on, all of what we have that we would consider in that category, being generous with the Dharma, being able to share the Dharma with others as best as we are able, to certainly also share any way that we can protect others. This generosity of giving protection from danger, from fear, is a very important one at this time. And then finally, the 4th one that's added on in some of the teachings is to be giving love, giving that loving kindness to others, which again, all of these are really quite important in the time that we're going through right now. So I think I'm happy that we were able to go through the teachings on generosity prior to all of this going on. Ethics is what we're going into today in more detail. We spent a little bit of time talking about it last week, and then we will again continue on through the remaining ones. The perfection of ethics. The perfection of ethics. When we talk about ethics, this is a definition I gave last week, which comes from Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodin in his book, wonderful Lam Rim book that's published in Australia, where his center was Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. He says, ethics is the virtuous thought to abandon both harming others and the thoughts that are the basis of harming them. So again, we harm others primarily through our physical and verbal actions. You know, so while we do that primarily in that way, and when we are interacting with others physically or verbally, nonetheless, it's the thoughts behind that that we also have to curb. Remember when we went through the prayers just a short while ago, and we said, do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Oftentimes things start with, having to curtail those ways that we are directly harming others, and of course harming ourselves by virtue of that when we lie to them, steal from them, so on, all these various things that we might do. And it's important that we then do whatever we can to practice virtuous actions. But the ultimate test of our practice is, what are we doing with our minds? And while it's very good to stop, saying negative things with our speech, to not harming others physically with our bodies, if the mind is still continuing to be in this mode of harming others through our thoughts towards them, through having hatred towards them, what have you, then it's not quite able to achieve that state of perfection. We can look like we're behaving very well on the outside, but what's really going on the inside? So this is the challenge in terms of how we work with developing this perfection of ethics. So one thing I might mention before I go back to the slides is, when you linked in through the website, and hopefully everyone's been able to kind of make their connection now that we've corrected the link there was one option as well on the website for the handouts. And some of you may have gotten the handout last week when we were at the center, but you're welcome to pull that up. I am going to have most of the information that's on the handout, in fact, all of it that's there for the first page, on the PowerPoint slides. So just know that that will be on the screen before you, so you don't necessarily need to do that. But if you want to review anything afterwards, you can go to that link that's at the website. So let me go ahead and pull this up again. For some reason I lost my PowerPoint. There we go. So again, that was the definition or description of ethics. On your sheet, if you do have it in front of you, you'll notice that the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is the ethics of restraint, the ethics of gathering virtuous dharma, and the ethics of benefiting living beings. These three types of ethics. These three types of ethics kind of do fit in with that idea of what we just mentioned in that verse. The very first one, the ethics of restraint, means essentially our ability to refrain from doing non-virtue, from harming other beings. Harming other beings being the essential thing that the Buddha taught that we should be avoiding at all possible costs. Remember, there's this word ahimsa in the Sanskrit or Pali, I'm not sure which, but anyway, this is essentially means non-harmfulness. It's really the core ethics of all that the Buddha taught, is to refrain from harming others. That's what we're going to talk about first today. The ethics of gathering virtuous dharmas is like that second line of the prayer, commit only perfect virtuous actions. So we want to, as much as possible, engage in virtue, engage in those things, states of mind, as well as actions that follow from that, that are useful to ourselves and others, that are wholesome and productive. The third that we're going to look at is the ethics of benefiting living beings, which we can say certainly so many beings engage in this, right? There are people who are doctors who benefit others who are ill, whether it be humans, animals, what have you. There are people who feed the poor, people who do whatever they can to benefit others. Again, what makes all three of these activities a practice of the Bodhisattva and a perfection of ethics is that we unite them with bodhicitta. So we aren't just refraining from harming others because we don't want to experience the effects of that. in terms of what the karmic consequences are, which we will go into shortly. And we also don't want to, practice virtue just for our own benefit, to gather all this virtuous dharma so that we have good things in our lives. We also don't want to benefit living beings so that they somehow benefit us, I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. Instead, we want to do all of these with this very selfless, altruistic intention of bodhicitta, that we're trying to be of the greatest possible benefit to others, and therefore we're going to engage in these three types of ethics. So let's go forward then to look a bit more at the ethics of restraint. Essentially, to restrain our body, speech, and mind from non-virtue. Again, that mental component is a very important part of it, as we saw in the definition of ethics. It's not just refraining from doing things verbally or physically, but also trying our best to have only non-harmful thoughts towards others, to not have the non-virtuous states of mind present, such as jealousy, pride, anger, desire, what have you. So there are two divisions that Geshe Loden talks about. We'll go into each of these sequentially. The first one is the fundamental level of this practice being to avoid the 10 non-virtues. So the 10 non-virtues is a way that the Buddha summarized kind of the things that we tend to do that get us in trouble. So these 10 non-virtuous actions are divided into three main categories: body, speech, and mind. And the first three that we're going to touch on briefly, again, most of you have had teachings on karma, so I don't want to belabor any of these points, but nonetheless, I feel like it is important while we're on the topic of ethics to do some investigation of these. There are three actions that we do physically. And these are actually set out in a order of the most serious generally being the first and the least serious being the last. Nonetheless, we can see that there are gradations within each of those. So the very first one is killing, taking the life of a being. Now, by extension, we would probably want to include in that category any other form of physical harm to the bodies of other beings. If we somehow manage to damage the limbs of a being or do some other harm to the body of a being, that would be included in that by extension. But the primary action that we have the most negative karma around is taking the life of another being. And this is where we do that intentionally, not accidentally, and where we generate kind of an intention to take the life of that being. That has to be there as well. We'll look at this in a moment in terms of the components that make these actions very strong. The second one is stealing. Stealing, of course, is taking anything that isn't offered to you and wanting it for yourself. And it can range from doing very minor things, which we probably wouldn't have much karma around, all the way up to taking things that are very valuable. But nonetheless, it's important that we avoid and respect the property of, avoid stealing and respect the property of others so that they don't have to worry about us doing that to them. The third one is sometimes called sexual misconduct. I like to refer to it as unwise sexual behavior. Essentially, this means any of the times where we are not using our sexuality in the best way possible through having sexual relations with others who are not our partners outside of our committed relationship, or with someone who is in a committed relationship that is having sex outside of their relationship, and we're participating in that. Certainly, this would also include any other non-consensual sexual behavior that people might engage in, where they are coercing others into having sex with them. A crime in society such as rape would certainly be included in unwise sexual behavior, but it also would have great physical harm that we're inducing on the other person. So anything in that category obviously would fit. But we also have to be, wise in terms of how we do use our sexuality. Or is it something that we have a greater control over or are controlled by it? So I think these are important aspects of it to look at. Let me just go through the rest of these 10, and then I'll take it off screen for a little bit to talk somewhat more about these. The 4 actions of speech, which most of you know, are also set out in that same order in terms of the worst generally being lying and the least powerful of these being meaningless speech. But nonetheless, keep in mind that this is just a general summary, and if we engage in one of these to a greater tendency, if we have a greater habit to do it, it can become very strong. And sometimes we can hurt others very deeply through some of them, whereas others, because it's not so serious, it doesn't harm them as much. So keep in mind that there are many other factors that would make these slightly different in terms of this gradation. The first being lying, which is where you knowingly speak or put forward in any form of communication, whether it be a text or an email or whatever, something that you know to be untrue. The divisive speech is where you create speech patterns that are going to separate people who are together or increase the separation of people who are already somewhat distant. So while we're on the subject of that, I might point out that that could certainly include the way that people talk about politics these days. It's doing a lot to harm other people in terms of creating more and more division in our society. As much as possible, we want to avoid that type of speech. Harsh speech is obviously where we use our speech in a cutting, harmful manner, where we say things that it might not be the tone that we say them, but it could be the words that we use, the way that we demean somebody through our speech. These are obviously very harmful patterns that we have to do our best to avoid. The meaningless speech, while this certainly can waste our own time because we get caught up in just speaking about things endlessly, going on about this and that, a lot of things that are not so meaningful. We also waste other people's time. So all of these 7 that we've looked at to this point, whether we talk about, again, the killing, stealing, unwise sexual behavior, or these 4 of speech that are on the screen, they generally can also have a harmful effect on other people around us. This is why, once more, we consider these to be serious actions, and in the Bodhisattva mentality, they're things that we want to avoid because we don't want to harm others. We want to do our best to benefit them. So we want to avoid these. In the traditional teachings, you start off saying that I don't want to do these because I will face the consequences of them. And we are going to see that as part of my presentation. But the main motivation that we want to try to bring to our practice of ethics is that we don't want to do these because others will be harmed by them. We will only contribute to their misery, to their suffering, if we continue to do these 7. And of course, the mindsets behind them are in the last 3. Generally what we do find is a heightened form of attachment, which we call covetousness here, a heightened form of anger or aversion that we call malice, or sometimes ill will, harmful intent. There's different translations for this. And then finally, the 10th one, which is a heightened form of ignorance, where we hold to wrong views, where we actually believe things that are opposed to what the Buddha taught. Particularly the one that's pointed out as a very unwholesome mind is where we don't have conviction in the law of karma, where we actually discard the law of cause and effect, thinking that it isn't operative and therefore I can do whatever I want. So these 3, unlike the other 2 sets, are set out in the opposite order. The 8th is actually the weakest, they say, generally, of these 3, whereas wrong view is the strongest. But once more, I could see certainly where malicious thoughts, ill will towards others could be a very, very powerful negative action. The thinking is mostly that wrong view. When we do give up our teachings on karma, these can become very problematic for us. That abandoning the teachings on karma means that we have kind of free license to do whatever it is that we want to do, of course within legal standards and what have you. If we get caught doing various things, then obviously we face the consequences. But if you think there are no consequences beyond this life, well then it's obvious that we can often engage in things that we wouldn't think would be harmful to us. So this gets into this whole teaching, and I want to spend a few minutes off screen before we go back to the slides, just talking about karma in general, because the karma, of course, is the underpinning for all of this that we're talking about in regard to ethics. And we can see that talking about karma becomes complicated because I can't in any way prove karma to you. And I'd be kind of futile in giving you any sort of evidence of that because we don't know for sure when things happen in our lives what the karma was that created them. But the essential fundamentals of karma are that karma is the operative way in which beings experience things. It's a subset of the law of cause and effect. And I've spoken about this many times, but we we have great confidence in the law of cause and effect in the world around us. I mean, if we look at what's going on in terms of this pandemic, we see that there are causes and conditions as to why this virus is here, why people are getting this virus, what steps need to be taken to avoid contact with it, and so on, and everything. We have confidence that when we hear about things in our physical world, that we can trust that the causes and conditions are operative, that people won't get the virus from nowhere. If somebody was isolated for 3 months and somehow got the virus, there'd be a total puzzle, right? People would go, well, how did that virus get to that person? So again, in the world of cause and effect that we see at large, we don't have any problem there. Why do we have such a problem taking that to the dimension of our experiences? Well, I guess part of it is because, once more, it's not so evident, but nonetheless, I think if we do pay some attention to what the Buddha teaches on karma, we can see that there are some ramifications that perhaps we can easily see, that we can understand even at the moment when we're engaging in those 10 non-virtuous actions, when we're doing things with our body, speech, and mind that are not so wholesome, that they do have a negative impact on ourselves, that they do diminish our kind of spirit, our, um, I don't want to use the word worth, but something, it really does have a negative impact on ourselves. We don't feel quite so good about ourselves when that happens. Again, this is indicative that we are moving in the wrong direction, that by harming others through our actions, through what we say to them or do to them, and the thoughts we have about them, can actually become very, problematic for how we live our lives and for the effect that we have on others in our lives. So this is the fundamental principle, going back to that idea once more of ahimsa, of non-harmfulness, that this is the underpinning for all of what the Buddha taught in terms of karma, is that we can see that the karma that we generally engage in that is unskillful is karma that harms other beings, and by virtue of that harms ourselves. There are some actions, and certainly when we get into the second part of this restraining from non-virtue, we'll see the vows, and many of our vows are not necessarily about other people. They're about our own abandoning of things from our side, thoughts and ideas and things that we want to make sure that we don't perpetuate in our minds. But nonetheless, most of what we talk about in terms of our basic ethics is refraining from harming other beings. So in terms of karma, while we don't have the evidential thing to show you and to say, okay, this is why this is happening to you, this is why this is in this world from a karmic perspective, if we live our lives with that understanding, I think the proof is in the pudding. We will actually see that we will gain a greater confidence in terms of how we are in the world. We will stop seeing perhaps so much harm, being generated towards us. All the karmic consequences that would normally be generated if we engage in those 10 non-virtues, we'll begin to see some diminishment in that. So that's why Venerable Rabina, and I always quote her on this because I think it's an amazing way to look at it. She uses the suggestion of saying it's not about whether you believe in karma or not. It's just simply using it as a hypothesis, a working hypothesis for how you're going to live your life. And if we begin to attend to our karma in that way, with some confidence that there will be results in the future because we are following this path of non-harmfulness, then I have confidence myself that we will actually see that this will be the answer to relieving our own suffering. But of course, the main impetus here, again, in this context of the perfections, is that we will also stop harming others. When we refrain from engaging in negativities, well, then everyone has a picnic. Everyone has, a wonderful time because we're not the ones taking things from them or trying to take their lives or lie to them or steal from, all the various things. So this is the idea behind karma. And once more, I hope most of you have already developed some conviction or confidence in karma. And I think during the times like this, it's very important that we do attend to that rule. And we do what we can, as I said earlier, to refrain from harming others in whatever way we can, and to do our best to help them. Remember, this is always His Holiness's advice. We're here to benefit other beings, but if we cannot benefit them, at least don't harm them. So let's take a look then at the remaining slides in terms of this part on uh, the restraining or refraining from virtue. Okay, so we went through the 10 non-virtues. One thing I do want to touch on, and most of you again have heard these teachings, but I think it is important that we understand what we mean by a complete non-virtuous action. So for every one of those 10 that we talked about, as well as, again, some things that might be correlated with it, there would always be a basis for that action, meaning something that we're doing that action in relation to. There would be a mental state, which includes three components: a correct recognition of what's going on, a motive to engage in that non-virtuous action, and a delusion that is present. The third thing would be the deed itself. We have to actually engage in the action. The fourth would be the completion, would be a kind of coming to some level of a conclusion. So let's look at these four in regard to the act of killing, killing once more being the most serious of all 10 of those, because those of body are said to be more serious actions than those of speech more serious than those of mind. And killing being the first of the three of the body would be the heaviest of those three. So the basis for killing is always another being. And I use the example frequently of a mosquito. We're not in the summertime where we have to worry about mosquitoes, but if a mosquito landed on your hand, you first have to say that the basis has to be there. This can't be some, piece of dirt that we're mistakenly thinking is a mosquito. It has to be an actual mosquito that is present there. So the basis has to be there to begin with, another living being that we are going to then engage in a process, an action around. The second thing is the mental state that develops in conjunction with that non-virtuous action of killing, which first involves recognizing that that is a mosquito on your hand. Once more, if you don't think it's a mosquito, you haven't correctly identified it. Maybe you've got your glasses off if you wear glasses like me, and you can't see it and you just think it's dirt or something and you go to sweep it away. Well, try to be more careful, folks, but nonetheless, if you didn't recognize it correctly as a mosquito, you don't really have a complete karma. You also have to have the motive to kill it, or at least to injure it, to do something to harm it for that to kind of begin. So, when you see the mosquito on your hand and you recognize it correctly, well, the thought might arise, oh, I need to squash this mosquito. Especially if it's a mosquito that's keeping you up in the middle of the night or what have you, and you see it finally land somewhere and you decide, oh, now's the time to take its life while it's there and I can see it. And then you do it out of some delusion. The three root delusions are to do it out of ignorance. You might think, oh, no problem. This being doesn't value its life. I can just take its life without any problem. You might do it out of attachment to the comfort of your own body and wanting to just not have that mosquito bite. You might do it out of aversion. Maybe the mosquito has kept you up all night and you really are angry at the mosquito for doing that, for buzzing your ear so many times. So you can have any of these delusions as well as any of the other secondary delusions that would be influencing you. So when you have that mental state that includes all three of those, recognizing that object, that basis correctly, having the motive to do harm to it, in this case, with killing, it would mean to physical harm, to kill it. And then thirdly, a delusion, one of those or any delusion that leads you to think that it is perfectly fine to take the life of that being. Then you engage in the deed. You raise your hand and you begin to, put it down on the mosquito that's on your hand, on your other hand, in order to squash it. And then the completion is you pick up your hand and you look at it, and the mosquito is deceased. The mosquito is gone. The mosquito has died. So again, for all of the other actions that I went through, all 10 of those, it is set out, and you can certainly find those in most of the Lam Rim texts. I'm not going to go through all of them because, again, this isn't a whole course on karma. This is just to once more make sure we have the underpinning of an understanding of karma in order to feed into our practice of ethics. But for every one of them, they go through all four of these elements, speaking to what will make it complete by virtue of having the proper basis, having the proper mental state, engaging in the deed, and it coming to some conclusion. One thing I might mention with regard to killing, and it's true for many of these, is that you can actually even ask someone else to do the deed for you and collect the karma in that same way. So say the mosquito isn't near you, it's over by somebody else in the room, and you said, oh, there's that mosquito, it just landed right there. I've been trying to get that mosquito, can you kill it for me? And if the person picks up a swatter or something and swats it and kills it, well, then you've created that karma as well as the person who's killed it, but you're the primary one. You're the one that asked them to do it. So keep those things in mind too. As much as possible, we want to refrain from engaging in a complete action, because a complete action, one that has all four of those factors, becomes very, very powerful in terms of the ramifications for ourselves. As I said earlier, we don't want to primarily practice ethics because of concern for oneself, but once more, the Bodhisattva is always thinking about, how do I best benefit others? Well, first, stop harming them. But if we do engage in those harmful actions and we suffer the consequences of ending up in an unfortunate state, how much will we be able to help others at that time? This is why, once more, when I talked about earlier in last week's class, I didn't go through all of that as a prelude to today, but we talked about how generosity and morality or ethics are these first two perfections, how they very much help each other. Generosity giving us the resources that we need to have a somewhat comfortable life so we can use that life well, we can benefit others with those resources, we can have a very fruitful life. But secondly, morality or ethics being the main way that we get a good rebirth, the main way that we actually have an existence where we can use all those resources well. I use the example of pets such as Leona Helmsley's dog, who ended up inheriting millions of dollars when she died, so that that dog could live a very cushy life for the rest of its existence. Well, I mean, that's pretty outrageous. That was a karma ripening in terms of all of that generosity karma from the past, giving all these resources. But it was a dog who was benefiting from that, a dog who couldn't really do much in terms of practicing the Dharma and doing something meaningful in that life. So we have to think about that. That's why all six of these practices are meant to be engaged in, regardless of whether we're lay or ordained or what have you. We need to be attentive to them because there is a karma to practicing them. The karma of generosity we discuss as, again, getting resources, the having things in our lives, dharma in our lives, and so on. All of the things we have in our lives came about through the karma of our own past giving. But then also the experiences that we have in terms of our rebirth, and then also what happens within that rebirth is predicated on what karma we've created through our ethical behavior. So once more, this is the need to emphasize both of those in terms of giving us exactly what we have, what we will require to get a good rebirth. We'll see patience also contributes that to some degree, but it doesn't have as much of an impact as these first two in terms of resources and the actual rebirth that we get. So back to the karma, when we have a complete action that has all four of these components or branches in place, then we have the full effect in terms of all the results that we gain from that action. So let's go to a slide for that. And by the way, if at any point you want to add any questions or comments in the chat box, you're welcome to do that. At some point, I will open it up to see if people want to share. You can turn on your mic and share a question or a comment, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. Let's just do a little bit more on the slides and then we will take a short break. I think it is useful to have a short break with these Saturday and Sunday morning classes because they do go on a little bit longer than the Wednesday night one. All right, so these are the four components again. When we have all four in place, we have four possible results of a complete non-virtuous action. I say possible because we can interrupt these through purification. But nonetheless, the very first one is the one that we've talked about just a few minutes ago. What is called the ripened result is the actual rebirth in a realm of existence. And of course, it being a non-virtuous action, it will result in an unfortunate state. And here too, I can't prove the various states of existence that the Buddha taught. The Buddha said that there are hell realms, these realms of unbelievable suffering. There are hungry ghost realms where beings are tormented by their hunger and thirst and incapable of satisfying that. And then of course there's the animal realm. That's the one I guess I can prove to you by showing animals. We don't know their minds exactly, but we can infer their experience on the basis of what we see. But a rebirth in one of those three realms is possible through your having committed a complete act, complete action with all four of those branches in place. So the act of killing, for example, could result in a pretty hellish existence if we take the life of another being with some angry thoughts and what have you. You could experience great suffering in another realm on the basis of that at the end of this life or at the end of some future life. And again, within the Bodhisattva perspective, will we be able to be a benefit to others in those lives? Will we actually be able to use that life meaningfully? Yes, we're going to suffer, and we need to be concerned about our suffering. But at this level of our practice, we also want to think about how that will become a barrier for us to be able to help others. Second and the third are sometimes lumped together into just this title of results similar to the cause. One is in terms of experience, the other in terms of actions. So the experience one is how we tend to think of karma. When we have this idea of if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. Very simplistic way of looking at karma. But essentially, when we have an experience in terms of illness or some something unpleasant that we have to meet, we can say that we must have created the causes in the past in a very similar way to have that experience. So if we are seeing illness in our body or problems, difficulties physically, it's because we've harmed the bodies of others, because we have not been so respectful of the physical well-being of other sentient beings. So this is one that we see quite clearly, and yet again, we don't know the karma of it. We can infer it, that whenever we have an experience, that it must be similar to what we did in the past. This is why Venerable Pema Chodron, in one of her books, she refers to this idea of seeing karma as life giving you the lessons you need to learn. That if you have something coming up in your life that you're experiencing, you can go, oh wow, I must have done that in the past. I guess I can try to avoid that now going forward, and maybe even put some attention into purifying that. But all of our experiences are coming about due to something that was similar, something we did in the past that was in a similar vein. The third one is one of the worst results of karma, which is the tendency that we have to behave in a similar way because we have our actions, our behavior following the types of things that we've created. So the causes that you've created in terms of if today you're and in the future you think about anger towards other beings, well, you're going to create the cause for anger to arise more readily in your mind. All of our behavior and actions are going to be much more in line with that energy than with the energy of loving kindness and compassion and so on. All of these four results work on the virtuous side as well, but in an opposite way. We'll have uh, actions that are much more wholesome and virtuous if we engage in those now. We'll have experiences that are much more pleasant if we engage in the causes of that. And we also have a better rebirth. The last one is our environmental results, which speaks to the fact that even the very environment that we live in, even this place, this Santa Fe, your own neighborhood, your home, the world around us is a creation of our karma. And again, this is impossible for me to prove to anyone. It's not denying in any way the physical causes of this world, that there were all the evolutionary steps that led to this planet being here. And of course, all of what we're doing now in terms of the physical deterioration of this planet due to our unwise behavior in that regard. We're not denying that all of that's happening. We're just saying that we have the karma for that to happen to our world as well. And these physical things that are going on are simply part of the process of creating that result for us. So these are, again, very important in terms of understanding. And so if we go back to them once more from that Bodhisattva perspective, we see that, as I said with the first one, we want to have a good ripened result. We want to have a good rebirth. We want to avoid creating the causes to plummet from this life into an unfortunate state, because not just from the vantage point that I will suffer, but I also will be limited in terms of what I can do for others. If we look at the experiences similar to the cause, well, if we can also want to avoid that to be able to benefit others. I keep jumping back to what's going on in our world right now. But I think it's important that we relate these teachings to that. If we look at it and we say, well, I don't want to have the experience of getting COVID-19 and having the complications from that and potentially losing my life, we can do that in a very selfish way, right? And I don't I don't deny that people will start there, and it's perfectly fine to have some level of trepidation to say, okay, I don't want to experience this. But then if we look at once more, if I have that experience, then if this life gets cut short, I don't have the ability to help others, to continue to develop my mind. I may end up in an unfortunate state, may not be able to use this life to the greatest benefit for others. That's another perspective, right? We can avoid having this illness spread to ourselves and to others because we want everyone to benefit from that. We want to be of greater use to others. We want to continue to have this life so we can do that for others. it makes a huge shift in terms of our minds when we do it, moving away from that selfish perspective, thinking that we're only doing this trying to avoid COVID-19 so that we don't get sick, versus we do it because we cherish others, because we don't want to lose our own vitality, our life, so that we can then continue to be a benefit to others in this world. We can continue to do what we can to develop our minds, our qualities, to have a greater effect on the well-being of sentient beings. So that's in terms of the second one. The third one, why we don't want to have the results similar in terms of our actions or behavior. Well, obviously, if we continue to buy into these mental mindsets as well as the physical and verbal actions that are non-virtuous, we're only going to keep harming others as well as ourselves. So we want to create more wholesome patterns. We want to move away from those that are destructive. And then finally, in terms of the environment, well, again, we're not the only ones living in this environment. Others are involved in this. So while we can have a very narrow perspective of thinking about, I want to refrain from these actions because I want to have a good environment to live in where there's clean water and a nice, good air and all the things that we need to survive on this planet. We can also do that with the motivation of benefiting others. So I wanted to introduce those 10 non-virtues and the 4 results, the way that you make them complete, those actions complete, so that they will give forth those 4 results, so that we have an understanding of what happens to ourselves, but moreover, because we also see that we're connected to others, that everything that we do in terms of our ethical behavior, especially this first one of refraining from committing these 10 non-virtues, is also embedded within that understanding of the welfare of all beings. That if we actually tend to this for ourselves, we will be greater capable of helping others. Others will receive some benefit from that. Others will have some ramifications in their lives if we practice good virtue and avoid non-virtue. So that's kind of, again, a little explanation I wanted to do that I hope hasn't been too redundant for many of you, because I know many of you have studied karma. But nonetheless, this is what we always have to do, is to remind ourselves of these things that are very core teachings. And this is all, again, taught in the very first level of the stages of the path, the Lam Rim. It's taught there primarily with that more selfish motivation, that we need to be concerned about our future rebirth and what happens there and the experiences that we have and so on. But we can transcend that. We can go beyond that once more to have a greater motivation for doing this. That we think that we're refraining from killing that mosquito, not just because, that mosquito will benefit and, will benefit by having good results, but so that all beings can benefit. So that by our doing that, we will end up with a continuity of good rebirths. We will have good conditions so we can continue to move closer and closer to enlightenment. So we will be more qualified to help other beings. So absolutely, this is the Bodhisattva mentality that we want to bring to this as much as possible. So what I think I'll do at this point, it's about 11 minutes after we did this yesterday, just took like a 5-minute break, since we don't need to do the full break with everyone, waiting in line at the bathroom and what have you, especially if I think the bathroom's fine now at the center, but nonetheless, we had some difficulties with it previously, the downstairs one. So I'm going to take like a 5-minute break. And so I've just turned 11:12 on my computer. So about 11:17, I'll be back here and we'll continue with the teaching. Some of you may have looked at the chat box, and Rowena did add one comment that behavior is also imitated. What one does may increase through influencing others. So this is also another part of, how we can have thoughts about our behavior in the world at large, that when we act in particular ways, that we become an influence on others as well. So what I said earlier is one way to look at it, and that's also what Rowena suggested, a very positive way to look at it as well, is that especially when our actions are seen by others, and others might be encouraged then to be kinder to their fellow beings on this planet and what have you. So I thought I'd open it up at this point to see if there are any questions. You're welcome to unmute your mic if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And certainly also you can put something in the chat box and I'll be happy to read it. Keep in mind this is being recorded, so if you do come on, your voice will be recorded. If you turn on your camera, then you'll also get recorded in that way, but it's really up to you in terms of how you might want to share. But So if there aren't any comments or questions, maybe I'll give another minute or so because somebody might be writing something in. But one thing we're going to do today at the very end of the class, many of you have seen that Lama Zopa has put together some suggested practices, and there's one in particular, the Vajra armor. And although I'm not absolutely sure about the pronunciation of the entire mantra, I'll do my best to do that. I've got a slide I put into the PowerPoint presentation with the mantra, as well as a picture, tanka of Vajra armor, this manifestation of Vajrapani, this Buddha that represents all the power of the Buddhas. And this is said to be a particular practice that's good to do. So we'll do that at the end of the class today, in addition to our dedication prayers. Those of you who want to participate in that are welcome to join in. And we can do that for the benefit of all beings, especially those in this world who are dealing with problems around the contagion of this illness. So I didn't see anything appear in the chat box, so I'm just going to continue on then. Let's go back to the slides, and I'll share again from here. We just finished this whole section then that had to do with the first of these divisions of the ethics of restraint, this fundamental level of our practice avoiding the 10 non-virtues. This level of practice is to avoid both neutral negativities and negativities by decree, by engaging in the various levels of vowed restraint. So by vowed restraint, we mean, of course, when you actually step up to the plate and take the vows that are taught in the Buddhist tradition. And they include, many of them, a number of them are natural negativities, but most of them, I would say by far, are negativities by decree, meaning that they are negativities that are only because the Buddha taught that within the context of our behavior, we want to avoid them because they help us on our practice, because they encourage us to do various things. So we have been looking at the vows, the secondary Bodhisattva vows that we looked at for the generosity, and we'll look at those for ethics as well. But essentially, there are three levels of vows that are taught in the Buddhist tradition. The pratimoksha vows, this pratimoksha, the prati means self, moksha, liberation. So there's self-liberation or individual liberation vows. The main ones that we work with in terms of lay practitioners are called the lay vows, and they essentially are five main behaviors. So let me take it off screen for just a second. I'll come back and talk about the other two. So the five lay vows that we engage in, the very first one, and in fact the first four, are the first four that we saw to some degree in the non-virtues. The first one being to not kill, to not intentionally take the life of another being. And we don't really lose the vow completely unless we take the life of a human being, but we shouldn't take the life of any being because all beings value their lives. The second vow that we take in terms of the pratimoksha, the lay vows, is to refrain from stealing. There it means particularly stealing something that's of value to others. And of course, but value is often in the eyes of the person who owns it. So we should be very careful not to take the possessions of others if we take that vow in particular. The third one is to refrain from engaging in inappropriate sexual behavior, unwise sexual behavior, and there, once more, it's primarily referring to adultery or any form of sexual behavior where people are coerced into sexual behavior, what have you. The fourth one is the first of the speech, and it refers to lying. And the primary one, the one that you lose your vow by doing, is if you lied about your spiritual attainments. But obviously, we can lie about many things, even white lies, as they're called. We should avoid deceiving others with our speech as much as possible. The fifth one is one of these that is, again, a prescribed kind of a negativity, something that is within the Buddha's vows, but is not negative in its nature. It's not a natural misdeed. It's only one that is determined to be so by virtue of the ramifications of it from a Buddhist point of view. And of course, that fifth one is avoiding alcohol and intoxicants. And it's taught in different ways by different teachers. Some might just say alcohol. But we do see that impairments to our mind can have a unfortunate impact on our physical and verbal behavior. That if we take alcohol to the point where it does influence our mental capacity, that we might engage in other behaviors. So it's not a vow that everyone's required to take. In terms of when the lay vows are generally given in our tradition, you have the option of taking any number of them, one of them all the way up through 5 of them. But it is useful for a practice, and if you haven't taken the vow, it might be useful just to keep an eye on that behavior to make sure that it doesn't become the avenue through which you do have some diminishment of your capacity and your ability to discern what's right and wrong, and potentially engage in action that is harmful to other beings. So those 5 are what most of us would refer to as the pratimoksha or individual liberation vows. Keep in mind that within that category, though, are 7 other sets of vows, one of which is very similar to the 8 Mahayana precepts. It's taken only for a day, but the motivation in that context isn't the Mahayana bodhicitta motivation. It's rather just the wanting one's individual liberation, that one refrains from the 8 behaviors that are part of those precepts. I won't go into all of that in detail today. The other 6 of the vows all have to do with ordination. And so ordination, of course, are for those men and women in our community who make that decision to more seriously commit their lives to the Buddha's practice. And so there are vows that were taught by the Buddha for an initial person who just wants to sort of try it on. And there are, like, I think 7 vows that one holds initially if one's in that category of kind of an initiate. And then there are the novice vows as well as the fully ordained vows. And again, if you do decide at some point in your life to take ordination to become a monk or a nun, then at that point you would go through an investigation of all of those vows. And they go up into the hundreds by the time you're fully ordained. But they do have a lot of these kinds of, again, offenses that we wouldn't say are natural misdeeds, such as for a monk or a nun that's fully ordained. I think one of the vows I've heard is that you don't trim the branches of trees or dig into the soil. And that's, again, because while doing those things as a regular person might not be such a big deal, as an ordained person, you want to refrain from harming beings as much as possible. So you don't know what creatures might be using that branch as a home, or what beings might be in the dirt that you're digging, and so on. So there are a lot of those that are, again, kind of set out by the Buddha in terms of the behavior that he wants those people who are extremely dedicated to their practice of ethics, following the Vinaya, as it's called. This is that whole subset of the Buddhist teachings that deals with behavior, following the Vinaya very purely, wanting to make sure that they do that. So within pratimoksha vows, just know that there are many other levels that have to do with the ordination, through becoming monks, nuns, what have you. Okay, so the second set of vows, the Bodhisattva vows, as I said, we've started to touch on those to some degree because I thought it would be useful as we went through each of these 6 perfections to, in particular, go through the branch vows that are related to each of the 6 perfections. The Bodhisattva vows start off with 18 root downfalls. These 18 root downfalls are the more serious offenses that we want to avoid once we've taken those vows. The 46 secondary vows, or transgressions that we would have, are things that we want to avoid, that are not of as severe consequence in terms of we don't lose our vows if we break them, unlike the root downfalls, but nonetheless there's something that are very serious in terms of our wanting to maintain the bodhisattva behavior. So again, I'm not going to go into all of those vows. They can be studied. The bodhisattva vows are a lot of literature. There's a lot of literature out there, and I've taught on them a number of times. The recordings are out there. If you want assistance in regard to doing a more detailed analysis and working with the bodhisattva vows, just let me know. It is good that you can study those and work with them before you take them. And when you are in the presence of a preceptor who gives you those vows, you can then have them in your continuum with some assurance that you'll be able to keep them pretty purely. And if you do have any transgressions, you can renew them very easily. The bodhisattva vows can be renewed on your own. They don't require that preceptor or any other preceptor to be there to do that for you. The 46 secondary or branch transgressions are set out in 7 sets. I mentioned this earlier, and 6 the first 6 pertaining to the 6 perfections. So we will look at towards the end of this course on the section on ethics. We'll look at those that are pertaining to the practice of ethics. But there are also, in addition to those 6 sets, there's a 7th set within the 46 secondary. And that has to do with our vows to kind of benefit other beings. We're going to see a little bit of a flavor of that in regard to what we're looking at in this perfection of ethics discussion, because a part of our perfection of ethics, as we saw earlier, is the practice of benefiting other beings. So it's kind of mirrored to some degree there. So maybe that's enough on Bodhisattva vows. Again, this is for those of the Mahayana persuasion who do want to more fully commit to the Bodhisattva path. Anyone, lay or ordained, can take those vows. And you need not even have taken the Pratimoksha vows prior to that, though it might be good to at least take some of the Pratimoksha vows before going on to the Bodhisattva vows. The last set of vows are the Tantric vows. Tantric vows are only taken with the highest levels of tantric practice. There are 4 levels of tantric practice, and the 2 higher ones, Yoga Tantra and Mahanuttara Yoga Tantra, those are where you would take the tantric vows. The 2 lower tantric practices, the Kriya and the Charya, or the Charya, which are action and performance tantra, you don't take vows for those other than the Bodhisattva vows. So the tantric vows are unique to those who engage in these higher levels of tantric practice. And again, the general rule is that they aren't discussed in terms of specificity until one has taken them. So you cannot study them in advance. Hopefully you've developed some conviction through your prior practice with the other sets of vows that when you take your tantric vows, that you'll be able to also maintain those. Nonetheless, they are said to be one of the more challenging sets of vows, for us to follow, because once you get to Tantra, you're really trying to work on a full transformation of your experience, and so you do have a lot more things that are set out to help you in that process. But I think it is important that when we look at vows, that we actually understand that vows are not some burden that we take, that we go, now I've got to carry around all these vows. What a heavy thing I have to deal with. It's rather a way of delineating exactly what the path is that we need to follow, so that we need not pay attention to things outside of that. We know very clearly what it is we need to pay attention to. So think of vows in that way. And one teacher, Venerable Thupten Dundrup, Neil Houston from Australia, I've known him quite a few years. He said that if we've been involved in Buddhism and we aren't taking vows, we might need to really check up on that to see what's the problem, what's holding us up. The advantage of vows that I do want to emphasize while we're on this subject is that when you have vows in your continuum, you've taken them again from a preceptor, so they've been imprinted in your mind. As long as you maintain those vows, you are creating the karma of refraining from that negative action through that strong intention you generated when you took it all the time. In other words, the clock's always running. If on the other hand, like let's just take the vow of killing, to not kill. So if we say the very first one, you take the vow of not killing, and then you are creating the karma of not killing. You are creating that imprint of that refraining from that non-virtue of killing all the time, even when you're asleep, even when you're not paying attention, even when you're, wherever. As opposed to, let's say, you hear these teachings today, or you've heard teachings in the past on karma, and you go, oh, I think I need to stop killing beings. And you make that mental determination that you're going to do it, but you never take the vow. Well, then, in essence, you're only creating the virtue of not killing, the opposing mind to that non-virtuous state, whenever you're tempted to kill. So when that mosquito lands on your hand and you go, oh, that's right, I'm trying to practice not killing. Well, then you get the virtue of not killing there. And it's helpful, certainly, to have that thought in the background of your mind that I don't want to kill. But until you take the vow, you don't have this kind of imprint in the mind that creates this continuous positive potential from doing that, which I think is just, again, something to keep in mind. It's I don't know, maybe more advertising for taking vows, but I think it is an important part of our path. Once more, from the Bodhisattva perspective, we want to have vows in our continuum so that we create unbelievable positive potential, so that we become enlightened even more quickly for the benefit of others. So there can always, once more, in any of these actions, we might look at it and go, well, wow, that'd be really good for me if I was getting all this karma from holding a vow. But it's not just you that benefits. It's the fact that you will be able to benefit more others through your becoming enlightened more quickly, through generating more positive potential, and so on. So that's probably enough on vows, and that essentially covers the entire topic of the ethics of restraint. This being, again, the very first level of our practice. The second in terms of the perfection of ethics, is the ethics of gathering virtuous dharmas. Remember that line from the prayer we read, you know, perform only perfect virtuous actions. This is defined as to engage in the accumulation of virtue, which ensures that you do not harm others. So again, the ethics of restraint was the actual refraining from harming others through our body, speech, and mind. Here, it's like if we keep our mind and our actions in a virtuous state, well, that ensures that we're not going to harm others. That unless there are obviously some, situations in our world where maybe we have to, in order to benefit some beings, we might have to harm other beings and what have you. But we always try to emphasize that we're about benefiting all beings through our virtuous actions, as much as possible, uniting everything we do that is virtuous with bodhicitta, so that it becomes the cause of benefiting others and certainly doesn't cause any harm, hopefully, through what we're doing. So once more, there are two kind of divisions, if you will. This is, again, a loose division that is set out by Geshe Loden in his text. He says this includes all virtuous actions, such as the six perfections, which is what we're discussing in this course. So all of them kind of fit into this category. It's kind of interesting. This topic of ethics seems to include everything. The 10 virtuous actions, which are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. So refraining from killing and, certainly uh, doing our best to protect the lives of others, refraining from stealing, taking their possessions that are not offered, refraining from any unwise sexual behavior, and so on. Those are the 10 opposites to the non-virtuous actions. And then the third thing that's mentioned here are the practices of what are called the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, the wisdom of emptiness, and so on. And of course, there are many things that are a part of the path that are included in this category. All the virtuous actions that we do, uh, inspired in whatever way along the path to enlightenment, can be included in this category. But for the Bodhisattva, once more, it's primarily to do all of these practices with that motivation of bodhicitta, to engage in generosity, ethics, patience, whatever, all of these with the intention of benefiting all beings. Then the next one, which is, because I don't think I put anything more for that. Whoops, sorry, need to go back up. The red on the bottom of that slide then indicates the other grouping of virtues is the practice of what are called the 11 virtuous mental factors. So some of you may have studied these. We did a course not that long ago. I taught it on Wednesday night on the minds and mental factors. Let me take it off screen for just a second while I talk about this. So in this study that is done, and this is a very important thing, Venerable Rabina emphasizes this a lot. In fact, the very first course I took with her, I think it was maybe as a follow-up to that, we did a whole survey of these minds and mental factors. Minds is primarily referring to that larger bucket of consciousness. Geshe Tashi, uh, who wrote a book on Buddhist psychology, he says that essentially this is like a screen on which a film is going to be projected. So we have six consciousnesses that fall into that category of kind of our main minds. We have the five sensory ones, and we have the mental consciousness, which is primarily our conceptual mind, but nonetheless it does have some other aspects to it. Those are what we call minds. And within those minds, there's always functioning these various mental factors. You have some of them that are present all the time. You have some that are present occasionally, but you never have a moment of mind without its attendant mental factors. So I'm not going to go into the full discussion of minds and mental factors as part of this class, but know that there is a whole study you can do where you essentially, we call it Buddhist psychology, where you get in and understand all these various aspects of our mind that we can mentally isolate that play a role in our experience of things, play a role in our creating of positive karma, creating of negative karma. The 11 virtuous mental factors are a subset within what are called the 51 mental factors. Besides the virtuous, there's another category that includes the root afflictions. Then we have another category that includes the secondary afflictions, a lot of attention being put on the afflictions. Then we have what are called the changeable mental factors, which are those that can be made virtuous or non-virtuous depending upon the situation. And then we have the omnipresent and the mental kind of determining, the object determining factors, those that help us to get more clearly at an object. Some of them are very utilitarian in nature, but some of them are really important in terms of flavoring the mind. These 11 virtuous mental factors flavor the mind in a virtuous way. They put a positive spin on our mind. Because when any one of them is present, we keep our mind in virtue. And as was said in that description of this topic, we thereby keep from harming other beings. If we keep a mind that is intent upon virtue, then we don't harm other beings because we're in that state of more positive outlook, a more positive thought process. So let's go back to those slides and take a look at these 11. So I'm going to talk about them here and there. I may go off screen occasionally just to go into some of them in a little more detail, especially this first one might be worth spending a little more time on. Because when people see faith on the list of a virtuous mental factor, many of us may have come from other spiritual traditions where faith had another dimension to it. In Buddhism, faith is essentially this mental factor which, when we see something like the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or the law of cause and effect, karma, all these various teachings of the Buddha, where we generate this very joyful state of mind that doesn't have any kind of problematic states. It's all about encouraging us to move forward, to follow the path, and so on. So let me go off screen because I do want to go into a little bit more about faith. Faith in Buddhism then, of course, isn't blind faith. Faith in Buddhism is something that we generate through our practice, through our conviction, through our experience. Oftentimes they talk about 3 levels of faith, and I like to present them in a particular order that you may not always see them presented this way. But the very first one is what's called a clear faith or clarifying faith. This is what we mostly are generating when we first come to the Dharma or when we're first learning about a new subject. It's kind of opening up our minds and seeing things clearly initially to get that kind of understanding of things. And it can be very inspiring right at that level, because when we first come to the Dharma, especially, and we start seeing the teachings, it can induce this strong feeling of kind of a dedication to these teachings, even without having practiced them. So this first level is maybe not quite as experiential as the other ones is, but it still involves some movement of our minds because we clearly see these things, such as the 3 jewels, or such as the potential for liberation and enlightenment, and so on. We become very inspired to move in that direction. Faith is the starting point for all of our good qualities. The second level of faith is sometimes called aspiring faith, a faith that then, on the basis of what we have seen clearly, aspires to move in a similar direction. It kind of is the movement of the mind towards achieving various things. So it could be, again, one's practice of karma. So initially one might clearly see all the aspects of karma, gain some conviction, some faith there. But then one aspires to engage in behavior that is following the principles of karma, such as what we talked about today. So you generate a faith that is based on your aspiration, your desire to move in the direction of what you've seen very clearly as something which is wholesome and positive. Uh, the third level of faith is what we keep wanting to make sure these two funnel into, which is called convinced faith, or the faith of conviction. And this is where we actually gain a deeper appreciation for what we are having faith in on the basis of our own experience, on the basis of developing an inner conviction that knows that we're on the right direction, that knows that we're on the right path. So it's a really wonderful level of faith to kind of be constantly funneling it into. And with each topic that we approach, we might go through all three stages. Initially becoming very clear on something so that we understand what the Buddha is presenting, how it is taught, all the aspects of it. So it already inspires us to some degree to kind of move in that direction, to have some joy at what we have found. Secondly, to generate an aspiration to do that actual movement in that direction. And third, to be able to acknowledge what we have accomplished through that movement. Some conviction that we gain, some belief that we have that's much stronger on the basis of our own practice. If we keep moving our faith through this cycle with everything that we meet, then the teachings stay very vibrant and alive in us, and we continue to have deeper and deeper faith. And of course, that faith then will manifest in a lot of other great qualities that we can have on the path. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more. It's already about 1:45, and I don't want to go into too much more because I think it's been a bit of a long class, and I don't want to, I want to allow enough time for us to do a little bit of practice again. The next two that I'm going to talk about very briefly, and then we'll stop after that. Here, I gave the names that I prefer for these two. On some lists, you'll see the first one called shame, and I call it self-respect. On the third one, you'll see the term embarrassment frequently, and I like to have it presented as consideration for others. These two mindsets are mental factors which keep us from engaging in negative behavior. The first one, self-respect, is where we see it from the point of view of our own personal conscience, if you will. Kind of seeing that I don't want to engage in this unskillful behavior, such as taking the life of another being or lying to this person. I don't want to engage in those because I want to live up to my own ideals that I'm setting, the bar at a high level. And so therefore, out of respect for myself and what I want to accomplish and the values I want to hold in my life, I will refrain from engaging in these unskillful behaviors and thoughts. The third one on the list, the second of these two, consideration for others, again, it's called embarrassment, which I don't really care for so much because even the other one being called shame, those have different connotations in English. With consideration for others, the point is that it also keeps you from engaging in negative actions, but it does so on the basis of your concern for others, wishing to avoid the disapproval of others, wishing to avoid causing them suffering. Sometimes I mention how, like, since we're all involved in a Buddhist community and we're all practitioners of the Buddha, and I certainly see this from my point of view of being a teacher at the center, that I have to be considerate of what Buddhism will appear like for others by virtue of my behavior. So if I go out and I'm, really unruly with people and I'm doing all kinds of things, saying harsh things, speaking negatively, and then someone shows up at the center and they see me as the person giving the Dharma teaching, they're not going to have so much faith in me, right? Because I didn't take into consideration the impact that my actions would have on others. It might cause them some suffering. It might even cause all of you as a community some suffering. Because if I don't watch my behavior, then I'm not a good example for what we teach there and for how we try to practice at the center. So consideration for others is where we take that other dimension, and it can be in regard to our teachers, not wanting to be reflecting poorly on our teachers or on our community or on anyone else, that we want to have that consideration. So the first one, self-respect, is where we think about ourselves and the ideals that we want to uphold. Consideration for others is another way of stopping our behavior by virtue of thinking about the effects that our actions and so on have on other people, whoever those other people might be. So what I'd like to do then, I'll go ahead and go to the end of this for today. Whoops. This is the practice that Rinpoche has advised. And again, we'll do this together since I'm already in the slides. And then when I come back, I'll see any questions in terms of today's talk. But in the spirit of everything that we're talking about here, to engage in virtuous actions, wanting to give protection to others through the perfection of giving, wanting to share the Dharma with them, and so on. Lama Zopa has given us this practice of Vajra armor to do to help ourselves and others at this time. time when we have contagious illness in the world and what have you. Again, we might think that at this point it doesn't look so bad for us in this little community, but things could change very much. And all of these positive actions we create can have a great benefit upon ourselves and upon others in this world. So generate that strong motivation of bodhicitta for engaging in this. And we can certainly visualize this being using this image that is here on the screen. Visualize that being appearing in the space with us right now. This being the embodiment once more of this enlightened energy power of the Buddhas, the ability of the Buddhas from their side to help us to the degree that we create the causes for that aid for those and other beings. And with bodhicitta motivation, thinking about all the beings in the world who are being impacted by virtue of this virus, as well as all the beings in the world in general who are suffering, who are experiencing the dissatisfactions of samsara. We generate that motivation for engaging in this practice, the recitation of this mantra. So as we recite this, we can visualize that from this Vajra armor being, rays of nectar and light descend down. They enter the crowns of ourselves and all beings, completely purifying all our negative karma. Everything that will give rise to any for ourselves and others is completely removed by virtue of our recitation of this. So let's try to do this 21 times. I don't have a melody for it, so we're just going to recite it as best as we can. Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Par Shig Naganan Tayata Arva Verita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Par Shig Naganan Tayata Sarva Verita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvaverta Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Swaha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavrita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari E Nen Pashig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Oha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshik Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha Om Pema Shavari Pe Nen Parshig Naganan Tayata Sarvavarita Hana Hana Vajrena Raksha Raksha Soha. So think very strongly that through our bodhicitta motivation, through the power of Vajra armor, all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are inseparable from our own gurus, all of these beings in the world, everywhere in all realms of existence have been blessed, have been purified, and all of them experience great happiness and bliss and complete well-being. Then let's go on to do the well, first see if there are any final questions. I don't know, I probably should have done that before the practice, but if there are any questions or comments that people want to make via the chat box or in person. Again, I can't help but emphasize once more what I said at the beginning of class today, which is really don't, as much as we do social distancing physically, try to do social closing, closing, nearing, whatever word you could use as a verb. Try to be as close to others as possible during this time. There are a lot of people who are dealing with other illnesses, other chronic conditions, who are unable to sometimes take care of themselves. If you can, reach out to them. Do what you can through social media, through calling people, through doing whatever you need to do to feel a connection. And we know from our practice, this is what we talked about even in regard to generosity in previous classes, that it feels good for us to extend ourselves in that way. It feels good to be more altruistic, to care for others, to cherish them. But we don't do it solely for that feeling. That's once more evidence that we're doing the right thing, that it does make a difference to others when we are able to extend ourselves in that way, and it certainly then makes a difference in our own hearts. So I really encourage you as much as possible during this time, use it for practice, use it for trying to connect with others in a variety of other ways, since we won't always be able to be with them physically, and be sure to keep that connection going. I also posted on my Facebook how important it is to practice Tonglen during these times. Everyone's kind of in this mode of covering up and not wanting to breathe. But in Tonglen, you're just sitting in the privacy of your own room and trying to breathe in all the suffering of others and to breathe out everything that will comfort them, that will benefit them. So I encourage you also to do the Tonglen practice as much as possible, and maybe we'll even start one of these Sunday classes with another Tonglen meditation, as we did the one day when there was snow and we didn't have quite as many people. But all right, so thank you all so much, and let's do our dedication prayers to conclude. Again, I'll do the best that I can. We will have a way of having these up here on the screen a little bit more workable. These are the verses that we've been doing. We don't have the dedication prayer in front of us, but at least we can bring to mind all those beings that we're aware of, that we're holding in our hearts, as well as just in general, those beings in this world who are dealing with all the various sufferings that are going on, especially contagion around this coronavirus and so on. All the beings dealing with fear and anxiety, dedicating for all their welfare as we recite these verses. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So I have to apologize for for His Holiness that we've been doing. So today we'll just do the older prayer that we have, first for His Holiness and then the prayer for Lama Zopa, as we recite these prayers for these two amazing guides that are support in this world, as all the other spirit guides that others depend upon in whatever tradition. May these beings have good health and long lives through the efforts that we've created here today, all the merits that we produce. May all of us always have perfect guides in all of our lifetimes. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay. So once more, thank you all so much for joining today, and I will look forward to seeing you all online soon and hopefully seeing you in person at some point in the future. But do take care of yourselves as well as all beings as best as you can. Okay, blessings.